Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
We're here with Hez Woolen. Hope I'm saying that right, Hez.
Yeah.
We'll just take a minute to let people in. Welcome, welcome. As you're coming in, please take a moment to let us know where you are in the world. Maybe include your title, what you do. And I'll put that in the chat too. Hello, Katie. Good to see you here. Sort of see you.
Welcome.
In the world. I misspelled that. Okay. Welcome, Brett. Welcome, Anna. Welcome, Jacqueline. All right, as you're coming in, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, and we'll get started really soon. Welcome, Jacqueline. Yes, to answer your question, Brett, we are recording this and it will be on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So do not worry. There are a lot of people who could not be here today who are looking forward to that as well. Welcome, Megan. Awesome. All right, I will continue to encourage people to say hello in the chat, but why don't we get started and introduce our guest of honor today. We have with us today Hez Woolen. Welcome, welcome, Hez.
Thank
you. Hez goes by the pronouns they, them, and is a queer and trans licensed clinical social worker living on Ohlone land in the San Francisco Bay Area, and Hez works in private practice. So in college mental health at UC Berkeley. Also, Hez is now in a doctoral program focused on trans perinatal health and mental health, which is amazing. And so they also offer training for organizations that want to gain confidence in working with transgender communities. And Hez works at the intersections of mental health, gender and reproductive justice, and is passionate about supporting trans and gender expansive folks in the family building process. And Hez is also a proud transgender and parent of a toddler, 2.5-year-old. So what we're covering today, today's topic is titled Trans and Gender Diverse Family Building for Providers. So this webinar today will focus on the unique mental health needs of trans and gender diverse people and what they face while trying to conceive. This webinar will offer an overview of challenges and barriers faced by the community within our current medical system, review some of the concepts and reproductive mental health through the lens of gender, and look at ways that providers can support trans and gender diverse people going through conception and fertility challenges. So this is going to be a wonderful webinar. I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Caton. I work at Return to Zero as a community support coordinator. I lead support groups, drop-in groups. I myself am a bereaved mom. I have 2 early losses, a stillbirth, and 2 losses in the second trimester. And I am lucky to have 1 living child, Josie Caton, who is amazing, going on 6 now. And so I am honored to hold this space with you all and for you, Hez. So I will turn it over to you and we'll get started.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. And thanks, folks, for introducing yourselves in the chat. And if you haven't done that, feel free to mention where you are, your name, title. I am excited to see that there are a lot of mental health folks here, which is awesome, because I think that this is an area where is very focused on kind of physical health and healthcare, and mental health kind of doesn't get a lot of attention. So I am going to share my screen right now, and yeah, we'll have, excuse me, bear with me a minute. Great. And so I do have some questions for you in the that you can put in the chat, and when those questions come up, I'll stop screen sharing. So okay, so our agenda for today is we're going to talk about family building considerations for trans and gender diverse people, how providers can offer intervention and support, and then I do have a case presentation if time permits. So let's see. Okay, awesome. Great, thank you. Okay, so I hope, my hope for today is that you all will be able to gain understanding of some of the barriers trans folks face while trying to conceive or family build, to look at some reproductive mental health challenges for trans and gender diverse communities, and identify specific interventions to expand support for trans and non-binary folks while trying to conceive. So I want to share this quote with you from a non-binary parent, and they said, "When I was pregnant, some people asked me if I felt more feminine. My body changed. I got more round. My breasts and my body grew. I got a more conventionally feminine body type. But I didn't feel more feminine. I just felt more pregnant, and there was more of me. Pregnancy and breast or chest feeding is not an inherently feminine thing. It's an inherently human thing, available to all people whose bodies can do it and who can choose it." So I found this quote really powerful and poignant, just speaking to the experience of gender while pregnant. And I wanted to share it with you. And if it resonates, feel free to just keep it in mind as we're moving forward. So I would love for you to be able to respond to this question, but these questions actually. And so I want you to take a minute and think, like, who gets to be a parent? And if you think about, or when you think about trans families, what comes to mind? What do those families look like? And how did the people you imagine become parents? So consider these questions. And then if you have any responses or thoughts that you want to share, please share in the chat. I would love for you to be able to do that. And okay, so I'll just wait a minute for if folks want to respond, have anything to say. Got one response here that says, "Look like individuals who want to share their love with another and raise them with love." Thank you. That's beautiful. Any other thoughts? So many ways to become parents. True. Hi, Mara. Yeah, it's too as complex. Love all look different as every family. Lots of ways to become a parent, indeed. So thank you, folks, for those responses. And I think, often we consider like the kind of archetypes of parenting in our brains. And sometimes they can look very like heteronormative, feature cisgender people. And I think, we've all internalized these messages. And so, even for trans and non-binary folks, gender diverse folks, we also think about these big kind of systems in play that come into our brains when we consider parenting, parenthood, building a family. And I guess the question of like who gets to be a parent, very complicated, I know, just to maybe kind of trouble the notion a little bit of maybe some of the images we hold in our heads. So, but I will say that, when we see different families in like mainstream media and other things, they often do not feature, surprise, surprise, trans people as parents. So I just want to name that, people are coming to this process without a lot of reflection around being reflected back around their experiences. So some of the family building considerations for trans and non-binary people who are trying to conceive, and I will say this is specifically more focused on folks trying to conceive than adoption, even though I will touch on adoption as well. So folks are really experiencing and really up against like a lot of heteronormativity and transphobia in across all settings. And so I'm glad folks are here today as a way to kind of broaden understanding. Medical and mental health considerations. There's specific things that come up for a lot of trans and non-binary folks, both medically and the mental health realm. Assisted reproductive technologies, which is something people are often using. The need for gender affirming providers at all levels of care, which I think, is really important because somebody, can go to a clinic and feel like, okay, I'm really welcomed at the front desk. People know how to like use my preferred name and pronouns. But, when I go back to like get my ultrasound, the technician is misgendering me. And, sometimes in big healthcare systems, people don't have the time or the resources to do training kind of across the board. So I think, even when some people are gender affirming at a particular clinic, like not everybody is, and it can be jarring for folks. And then access to resources, obviously, trying to conceive with assisted reproductive technologies is a huge financial burden. Illegal stuff comes up and can, of course, very emotional. So the resources for, therapy, for example, like might not be accessible. All right. So let's see. I have some notes on this slide that I really wanted to pull up because it will help me. Okay. So some of the fertility considerations that trans and non-binary people and gender extensive people are facing will be delaying gender affirming medical care. So this is a really big one. I think, so having any kind of gender affirming medical care, like taking hormones or having surgery, does not mean that people need to forego having a child, or having a child, doesn't mean that people need to forego taking hormones. Although, there's certain contraindications, like taking testosterone while pregnant is not recommended. It's not indicated for the parent and the fetus. But I think, many people think, okay, well, I can't transition because I really want to have a kid, and I'm worried that, if I do, my fertility will be impacted. And so anecdotally, we know that for people with uteruses, for transmasculine people who want to carry a child, there is no, like testosterone has no like net impact on fertility. And yet some people may, feel really concerned about, well, what would it mean, socially for me to be presenting as more masculine or like a man, and and carrying a baby. And also the same with like having chest surgery. If somebody really wants to chest feed, they may really push that off, and due to all the complications with reproductive health and getting pregnant, having a baby, that might really lead to some increased dysphoria for people to have to wait. And then for trans women or trans feminine people who want to have a child, and want to take hormones, they typically have to recommended for them to bank sperm before they start hormones, because estrogen can impact sperm count, sperm production, the efficacy of sperm. So, all of these things are things for people to consider. And I will say that, even in my work with college students at UC Berkeley who are, coming out as trans at like 19 or 20, some of them are really having these considerations around like, do I do fertility preservation now, or, do I wait? But I really want to transition, and, trying to juggle all of these really big decisions for folks can create a lot of stress. And then, if people have to come off of their hormones in order to bank sperm, in order to get pregnant, in order to stay pregnant, that can also lead to a lot of dysphoria. And I think just that, the shift in people's systems can really feel difficult. And also, if depending on like the length of time that people have to be off hormones, things may kind of become more challenging over time with uncertainty. Okay, I'm just going to check my notes. Okay. So, another thing that like if folks stop taking hormones, they haven't like detransitioned or no longer trans. I think that's really important. Like sometimes people will say like, oh, this person detransitioned to have a baby, but hormones don't make a person trans or not. So I think that's something to consider. I think people are really deterred by lack of affirming providers, lack of affirming spaces. So that can also mean like, if I, as a trans person, I'm struggling to conceive and I want to go to a support group, how will that be? Am I going to be like a support group at like, my hospital where I'm working with a clinic there, for example, like how will the other people be? And will I feel reflected and supported? And then, of course, our current culture of hostility and anti-trans legislation. So I am going to show you this map. So this is a map of gender-affirming care bans impacting youth. And I think it's been 19 states that have passed gender-affirming care bans impacting youth. Can't see map. Thank you. I think I have to do this. Can you see it now? Okay, great. So, I think that this, and in the states that are in orange, it's being considered. So I think this graphic is like really stands out to me. And there are some of these states that have put bans on gender affirming care for adults, like Florida, for example. Of course, some of these are luckily being challenged in courts right now, but just the current landscape, like if you are, a person living in Texas and you want to become a parent and you want to, gestate a baby, like there's a lot at stake. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. Can you see the slides now that I've switched over again? Awesome, thank you. I'm sorry, I'm an elder millennial. My tech skills are not amazing. Okay, so considering trans pregnancy and parenting, also these animals are all trans animals, all the animals in this slide show. So there's a limited but growing body of research on trans pregnancy and parenting. We already talked about spaces not taking into account the needs of trans folks, and like the postpartum unit in some hospitals can be called like the mother and baby unit. And certainly many trans patients have to answer very deeply invasive questions from medical providers about their bodies, sometimes during very vulnerable procedures. And so these are all things that real people have said to trans people. So some examples are like when somebody calls the clinic and they have like a deep voice and they, sound masculine, and the people on the phone are like, "Are you sure you're here for fertility?" When you get pregnant, you can use the back door at our clinic. And wait, how can you lactate if your boobs are not real? So, all of these things are like questions and considerations that trans people have to field while going through this process. And so thinking about infertility, quote unquote infertility, is defined by the Mayo Clinic as not being able to get pregnant despite having frequent unprotected intercourse for at least a year for most couples. And, of course, this definition is extremely heteronormative and assumes, that the gender of the two people having sex are cisgender people. And the reality is that, trying to get pregnant might not look like this for many trans people. And so then, like the concept of social infertility means not being able to conceive due to circumstantial reasons, like barriers to being able to be pregnant, social barriers to being able to be pregnant. And there's kind of a debate in the community as to like whether social infertility is, some people think it's like offensive and, created by constraints that we have in society. I will say, like, I think it's important to talk about the ways that society blocks people from being able to reach their goals. Like many insurance companies will say like that even the ones that cover any kind of assisted reproduction is like, you have to be having intercourse for a year if you're under 35 and 6 months over 35. And, some people are just not starting out like that. This forces trans people to engage with the medical model, which can, of course, perpetuate harm, thinking about diagnosis and pathology. Medical model is for-profit care and definitely does not center the needs of trans people. All right. So some paths to family building include, having intercourse with a partner or donor, doing a known donor insemination, ICI and IUI, so intracervical insemination and intrauterine insemination, IVF, in vitro fertilization, or reciprocal IVF, where one partner will donate an egg and the other partner will carry, surrogacy, certainly, and adoption. So these are all things that, people are considering on the path. Lots of twists and turns and windy corners and lots of decision making. And so we're thinking about providers, and especially mental health providers. I feel that our history has a really big impact on our present for how clients are showing up. So certainly there's a huge fear, which I think is still really present, even though things have changed a lot, about people being forthcoming with providers due to history of gatekeeping. And so particularly like if somebody, is considering having surgery and they need to get a letter from their provider. So folks who don't know, any kind of gender affirming care requires a letter from a mental health provider, sometimes 2 letters. And in the past, there was a lot of gatekeeping around, whether or not a person was quote unquote like trans enough to have surgery, whether or not the provider thought the person was sufficiently trans to be able to go through this process. And there's some pretty difficult stories around like therapists talking to family members about the person, and all of these kind of rules that people had to follow when they're experiencing a lot of pain around how they feel in their body and just would like to make a change. And even, when I see people now, they're like, okay, well, I was really worried about this meeting because I thought that, I'd have to kind of like prove something, and just that's part of our history and we have to contend with that. So if someone comes in and they're like, I want to have top surgery, and they need a letter from their provider, but they've also talked about like wanting to carry a baby, and the provider doesn't understand that, I think that can be, a huge barrier to care and therapeutic relationship. There can be a fear of being misunderstood and rejected, like both in medical and mental health settings, performing certain facets of identity to conform to quote unquote normative standards of gender. So someone who is like non-binary might talk to a provider about like, yes, I'm a man, but I want to carry a baby, so that their gender like is more legible. And certainly power dynamics are more fraught and quite significant in these settings. So some mental health challenges that people are struggling with in this process, certainly grief and loss is a huge part of the process, right? So I think trans and non-binary and gender expansive folks are already contending with grief and loss, no matter what, in terms of how we are like seen in society, supported. I'm sorry, my cat is doing something over there. Apologies. And so, the grief and loss of feeling really marginalized in society. And then, even if their process of conceiving is easy or, doesn't take a very long time, I think people still feel some grief around like being unseen, being misunderstood, being unsupported. But of course, if there are complications in trying to get pregnant, if there's like recurrent pregnancy loss and people are on a really long road, everything can kind of be compounded together into, a significant amount of grief. And I think that that's really something, that is important to talk about, because folks kind of can hide it away. And especially if there are like in communities where a lot of people are getting pregnant and having babies, like that can feel very impactful. Also trauma, certainly past trauma, of any kind can kind of make the process of trying to conceive more difficult and arduous. And then, of course, like the trauma of discrimination. Gender dysphoria, which we've touched on a little bit, both with like having to come off hormones, having to delay transition, and changing bodies. Feeling really isolated. So, like certainly like the pandemic has allowed for more virtual spaces where trans people can be supported in trying to conceive, but even, people living in like more isolated areas may really feel like they're kind of the only ones. And even in bigger cities, I think it's like a pretty difficult sometimes to find folks, other folks who are going through the process if it's not explicit. Medications that are used in fertility treatments can contribute to mood disruptions, even, certainly like if it can contribute to mood disruptions for kind of on a month-to-month basis if people are doing that, and also if they have any prior history of mood stuff, it can definitely worsen mood. And then prior mental health considerations can really become heightened with the process of trying to conceive. Okay, so going back to grief and loss. So Kenneth Doka referred to disenfranchised grief, which is talking about grief and loss that's not socially acknowledged. And like someone is trying to conceive every month and going through cycles of grief, but they can't talk about it because the loss associated with trying to conceive is not socially valid, right? Because, you know, there's something intangible that's being lost. And maybe really hard to talk about for fear of like coming out to people, being invalidated, misgendered, even with, you know, friends that are supportive in other ways, just might not get it because they might not be kind of in the same life stage. People might experience complex or disenfranchised grief because of the possibility of hope and loss so closely connected to each other. So let's say people are doing, you know, monthly cycles of trying to get pregnant, like the hope that there might be a positive pregnancy test up until the very last minute where it's, you know, still possible. And then the loss that comes right after that can really be a roller coaster. And the kind of anticipation, excitement can just sort of crash a little bit. All right. Okay, so let's move on to thinking about dysphoria and potentially euphoria. So not everybody not all trans people experience dysphoria, first of all, but not everybody experiences dysphoria during the process of trying to conceive or pregnancy. And some people can even experience euphoria and feel like the process aligns with their gender, just like the quote that I read at the beginning. But in terms of dysphoria, you know, sometimes people can feel like their body is not a safe place to land during TTC process because I think for many reasons, like an excessive focus on certain parts of the body can create more distress. And also, if people are struggling and, you know, they have pregnancy loss or, you know, can't get pregnant, they might really feel like their body is just kind of off limits, like disconnected from their bodies. And sometimes people worry that like fertility, or I'm sorry, accessing gender affirming like hormones has had an impact on fertility and kind of wonder about that. We already talked about delaying gender affirming care, being off of hormones. But then the concept of social dysphoria is significant because, you know, like, what does it mean to go out in public and be pregnant as a trans person, no matter how people are reading you? So, you know, I'll share that I carried my baby, and when, you know, towards the end, when I was more visibly pregnant, it was in like the end of 2020, 2021. So in a way, I felt lucky to be able to have be shielded from the outside world much more than I would have been if it hadn't been pandemic times. But as I became more pregnant, you know, people just read me as like a pregnant woman, and certainly that was, you know, advantageous for my safety, but it was like, did not feel good at all. And so these are kind of like, you know, things that people are trying to consider, calculuses that they have to make. Okay. So, you know, when we're working with folks, I think we really have to hold these, like the dialectic and the dissonance between, you know, really deep hope and a really deep loss, having control and having no control, magic and science, and the joy and possibility of resentment. And I think like that can be a really rich place to explore in therapy. And, you know, of course, like related to gender and other intersecting identities as well. Okay. So I'm going to skip actually, no, I think we do have time to do the case study. Yeah. So this is, the reality of trying to conceive for some trans people. And so this is a fictional person. And so this is about L, who's a 34-year-old trans man. He has wanted to carry a baby for as long as he can remember. He's been taking testosterone since his early 20s. He decides to stop taking testosterone so that he can restart his cycle. Finds himself with irregular periods and notes that he is not ovulating consistently. Decides to give it a few more months to see if things can re-regulate on their own. 6 months later, still not ovulating regularly. Tries to go to a fertility clinic, but is told that he needs to, quote unquote, try at home for a year. He's under 35 and he doesn't have a partner who produces sperm. And 3 months later, he has been fighting with his insurance company to get a visit at the clinic covered. Once his primary care physician advocates for him to be seen, and his visit is denied due to the gender marker on his insurance. He is understandably very frustrated, tries to take matters into his own hands, and tries a few times at home with a known donor. He does not get pregnant. So I want to pause just to think about the time frame. So let's say, he's already been prepping for trying to conceive for at least 9 months, which doesn't take into account the time that he's been off testosterone so that his periods can start again. And I think that this is a really common experience of queer and trans people, that they feel like they have already started so much before they've actually started trying to conceive, because there's so much legwork and so many barriers and hurdles to jump over that, it can take sometimes a really quite a long time to line everything up, which is also kind of tiring for many people. So at this time, a year has gone by and he's able to go to the fertility clinic. He decides to proceed with ART in the form of medicated IUI, which he has no insurance coverage for. Since he has a known donor, both him, his partner, and their donor need to meet with a fertility psychologist to ensure they're clear on all of the parenting agreements if he gets pregnant, which is practice at fertility clinics. And I think, most of the people going are queer and trans people with a known donor, not in all cases, certainly, but, many others who go to the same clinic do not have to meet with a psychologist. And it can feel very infantilizing. 3 medicated IUIs later, he's still not pregnant. And he and his partner are considering IVF. He doesn't have insurance coverage and he's just below the BMI cutoff for his clinic. So he's also facing some fat phobia. And now it's been almost a year and a half. He's feeling demoralized, sad, anxious, isolated. He's used a lot of his resources and is unclear where to go next for emotional, material, and medical supports. So this is quite a journey that he's been on, and this is where you can come in. So how to support, I think, the first thing that we all have to do, even trans people, is to sort of change our framework around what does it mean to get pregnant, to conceive, to build a family. Validating. And so by that, I mean, just challenging the messages that we have been fed, that we grow up with around, who gets to be in this process. Validating how heteronormative and gendered the world of fertility, childbirth, family building can be. An intervention could be encouraging somebody to think about the last time they felt good about their gender and exploring that, trying to figure out if making any small shifts are possible at this time. So for example, somebody has been off testosterone for a while and they're like, I just feel like I've kind of, I don't feel good about my gender right now. I don't feel good about how I look or how I feel in my body. You can ask okay, is there anything that, short of going back on hormones, which of course is an option as well, for a period of time, is to kind of think about, okay, what their clothes that might make you feel good, or, you know, other things that like type of exercise that makes you feel like really in your gender, other things that resonate with you. And even, you know, looking at images of people whose gender like resonates with you, or even images of yourself at an earlier time, can be, you know, a helpful intervention sometimes for people. Talking with people who are considering hormones about their fertility options, there's a lot of misconceptions. So I think, you know, when people initiate hormones, that it's not, I think this is happening more now, but there is not super common practice to talk about fertility and fertility options. And so, you know, I think when you're working with someone, you can ask like, you know, hey, did you talk about this with your doctor? What do you know about this? Certainly, you know, some people are not even considering wanting to have children, starting hormones. And so just something you may want to bring up with them, but just be sure not to talk outside your scope of practice about it. So, you know, the medical piece, you want to leave that to medical professionals, if you're a mental health person, and other professions. Doing mindfulness exercises with people, offering support groups, doing some embodied practice, like, is there anywhere in your body that feels safe right now? That place that they can kind of land in their body, even if most things just feel really terrible. I also want to say that, you know, helping somebody to move through decision-making process around like experiencing, you know, so much grief and loss around not being able to conceive and increased dysphoria, just helping them to hold like, okay, well, you know, you could go back on hormones for a while and see, you know, how that feels and recalibrate, or, you know, just that they know that they don't have to keep going, and validating, you know, how much people may want to keep going in the process. So just, you know, using those kinds of skills to help with decision making. And then, you know, I think like as far as community goes, community is such a big part for many people of the way that they feel supported and reflected. Trans people might be in a cohort of other friends and community members while trying to conceive, which can allow for community support, but sometimes can, or like feel like, you know, maybe no one gets it, or you know, all my friends are getting pregnant and I'm not, so feeling happy for others, but frustrated about their own processes. Community can offer, you know, some either like increased safety considerations if people sort of come together, travel in numbers, things like that, but also sometimes can feel more charged for people emotionally, if, you know, they don't want to tell anybody, or they have, you know, they're feeling some shame. But also the possibility that community can offer different kinds of support. So like, you know, maybe there's not a cohort of other trans people trying to conceive, but, you know, can friends support or community supporting in different ways, like doing a GoFundMe for medical expenses, or, you know, just providing like some mutual aid in some form, or just really even being there for someone. And then I just want to share some resources. So there's some book titles on here: Queer Conception, Baby Making for Everybody. These are two books that have come out recently that are really, really great and inclusive for people of all different genders. And The Natural Mother of the Child and Baby Makes More. The Natural Mother of the Child is a memoir by Chris Malcolm Belk, who's a non-binary gestational parent. And I will imagine that, you know, as we kind of move forward in coming years, there'll be sort of more first-person accounts of this. Baby Makes More. Local resources, if you're in the Bay Area, the Oakland LGBTQ+ Perinatal Wellness Center often offers support groups for folks trying to conceive, queer people, and they did have one that was specific for trans people before the pandemic, but I don't think that's still happening. They also have a list of like gender affirming providers, most of whom are located in California, but may be able to provide services beyond California online if they are, if their license isn't restricted to like a specific state. And then their online resources. Our Family Coalition has great resources for folks. Moss the doula is a trans doula out of Baltimore who runs trans perinatal groups in general. And King Ya, Queer Birth Worker is their name on Instagram, but they offer a lot of workshops and a lot of opportunities for further training for people. And also, if you're working with people who want more information and support, these are all places to start. Right. So we have about like 15 minutes for questions. So this is the end of the formal presentation.
Thank you so much, Hez.
Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to share any questions you have, and
or any responses that you might have to the material that I've shared with you.
Hez, thanks for sharing all those resources too. That's really helpful as well. I'll definitely be capturing some of those for Return to Zero.
Yeah, thank you. Glad it was helpful. Yeah, still digesting, trying to learn more. Absolutely. My contact info is on the last slide, since you are more than welcome to contact me if you want to talk further. Any suggestions for systemic advocacy pieces? What a great question. Well, I'm curious, like, at what scope you're thinking about. But I will say, let's like take the example of a hospital fertility, like a hospital fertility clinic or OB/GYN clinic. I think like, one thing for people to think about is like, can we put our resources towards having somebody come in and talk to us about how we can better support this population? Can everybody from, the front desk person to the phlebotomist to the attending physician, can they all attend, and can we make space for that? And I think really just like the process of education, potentially a working group for people to try to keep discussing these things. And, we all come to this with really different levels of experience and knowledge, right? And so I think that really being able to kind of be on the same page, I think can be really helpful. In a broader sense, systemic advocacy, I mean, I think there's like this really, if we're thinking really big, just, working on kind of more equity in healthcare settings, like working on advocacy with insurance companies. I mean, there's so many options. And I think, Megan, I don't know kind of what your work is or where you're coming from, but I think, trying to figure out like what the capacity is that you or your colleagues have for this. Ideas and resources around fertility clinics being more inclusive in their process and paperwork. Yeah, I think, the possibility that fertility clinic can have not all, not all places have like the ability to put, like posters on the wall or like physical representations of families and what they could look like. I think certainly like just training folks to, not gender a person when they come in. I think it's really like very common to, and also like a sign of respect and courtesy in some areas across some cultures to say like, okay, ma'am, okay, sir. And, trying not to do that in the beginning. I think paperwork can be amended to have, instead of like name, it can be like legal name, preferred name, space to share pronouns, a space to openly put gender identity. So I really came across this survey that I had to fill out the other day, and it was like, please identify your gender. And the options were like male, female, transgender male, transgender female, and other. And I was like, yeah, I don't like this. This is not inclusive of gender diversity. And it was very surprising because it came from a place where I thought, would be kind of more on it. So I think just having more open-ended processes for people to talk about their experiences, and maybe even, I know like some healthcare systems, and this doesn't work for even sometimes in practice, it doesn't work, but can kind of flag someone's chart so that, providers know and people know to use the correct name and pronouns for people. And certainly I have some more ideas, but I'll hold that for now. How do I think required clinic meetings for people using donor gametes can be done in a way that's helpful to people? The goal is not supposed to be evaluation, but support in the complexities of raising donor conceived people who are telling us in droves that we've done badly. Yeah, I appreciate that question, actually, Joelle, because I think that, well, I think off the bat, like people, that can be explained to people, because I'll say like, for me, it was just like, well, you have to do this required meeting, not like, hey, we talked to everybody that has a known donor and we meet with all of you, and, like, it's not supposed to be punitive, like it's supposed to be, or like evaluative. It's supposed to actually be more supportive to your process. And ultimately, I did find the conversation helpful, but I just felt really salty about it because it just felt like, okay, we have thought about all of these things a lot over and over and over again. So I think really just being upfront about why do we do this, because queer people kind of just feel like really targeted because there's yet another step that we have to go through in the process. And so I think that when it's presented in a way that's like more choiceful, sometimes there's not really choice, but just like more accessible to people's understanding, I think that's probably, the biggest part. And yeah, I think there are probably a lot of different answers to this question as well. And so, I think I'd be curious to hear other people's thoughts on it, just kind of in a broader context, but that's my answer for today.
Thank you so much, everyone who showed up today. And for anyone watching this in the future, we hope that you gained a lot of insight that Hez has shared with us. Hez, thank you so much for being here today and doing this with us.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I feel really like excited that your organization is like moving in this direction. I think it's great. This is an example of working towards more inclusivity, right? So
Absolutely. And there's still a lot to learn, but I'm glad we're also, supporting this community. We also have a drop-in support group, LGBTQ plus focused, once a month at Return to Zero online, the last Sunday of each month. So that's available as well. All right. Yeah.
Here's my contact information. I'm really happy to be in touch with anybody who wants to be in touch with me around this, if you want to continue the conversation in some way, happy to be a resource to you. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you so much for being here.
Yes, wonderful, Hez. Thank you. Take care, and we'll be in touch. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks, Hez. Take care.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.